All right, tick-tock, time to rock. How's everyone doing? Just want to wait a few seconds to make sure we're actually broadcasting live and that there are no technical difficulties. Let me know if you can hear me clearly. I see my face pop up on the screen. Looks like I'm live. Oh, you see this? I've been following the Christchurch attack today. I haven't been following any news with Tommy Robinson, but someone just said Tommy Robinson lost his case against fascist UK police. All right, yeah, I haven't been following that. I'll check that out afterwards. All right, so everyone says they can hear me. Robert, why don't you introduce yourself to anyone in case this is the first time they're hearing from you, and that way we can also simultaneously check your mic.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Spencer here, director of Jihad Watch, author of books such as The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS, The Complete Infidel's Guide to the Quran, The Truth About Muhammad, and 15 others.
And what do you do besides that, Robert?
What do I do besides that?
Besides write books.
Well, there's Jihad Watch, which is updated many times daily with news and commentary about jihad activity in the United States and around the world, and I bet you can tell I've said that before. And I listen to a lot of jazz music.
Yeah, I've heard. And all right, well, guys, we're going live here to discuss the Christchurch Mosque massacre in New Zealand. I heard about that. I was actually staying up late last night watching my kids, and that's when I saw the news starting to break. And at first, I don't know about you, Robert, but when I hear about a terrorist attack, I'm always wondering, until we actually have details. Always wondering, even if it's a random terrorist attack, if you start thinking, okay, is it a jihad terrorist attack, or could it be someone else? Because you do have Timothy McVeighs of the world and people like that. But even when there's a mosque attack, first thought is, okay, so someone went out and decided to kill a bunch of Muslims. But at the same time, it's also, well, I better wait until news comes in, because that could be a rival sect or something like that. Yeah, had to wait a while for news to come in, because at first, don't know what's going on. So, how do you react, Robert, when you start hearing that there's a terrorist attack?
Well, of course, it's pretty much like what you said, David, that the first thing is I wonder if this is jihad activity. It's certainly possible whenever there's an attack on a mosque that it could be Shiites hitting Sunnis or Sunnis hitting Shiites. There are plenty of attacks of that kind in Afghanistan. And so I check to see if it is something that I need to report on. And then as it turns out, in rarer cases such as this one here, then I know that what's going to happen is that I will be blamed. And so that takes the discourse into a different direction. And sure enough, of course, today the Council on American Islamic Relations, the Hamas-linked Muslim Brotherhood Front Group, had specifically blamed Donald Trump and also mentioned Pamela Geller and me as being responsible for this attack. The Shooter's Manifesto does not mention me or Pamela Geller. He does mention Trump and answers his own question about whether he considers Trump worthy of following as a policymaker and a leader by saying, "Dear God, no." So he's not really a Trump inspired by Trump or by me or by Geller. It's pretty clear, actually, that, well, he's some sort of nut, really, an eco-fascist, he calls himself. But anyway, the thing is that we will get into that more, I'm sure. But the first thing that the opposition does, that the pro-jihad forces in the world that want to destroy all opposition to jihad terror and Sharia oppression, the first thing they do is rush to blame people who criticize and stand up against those things. That's what they did. And so most of today I was working on a response to them.
Yeah, so that is a good description if for your reaction to terrorist attacks. So if it turns out to be an Islamic attack, seems your thoughts are, well, I need to find all the details. And as soon as people start coming out saying that this has nothing to do with Islam, I need to show people the Muslim sources and what they actually say and how they do justify terrorist attacks. But that if it is anything other than an Islamic terrorist attack, then you have to brace yourself because it's going to be your fault somehow.
Yes. Yes. And the thing is, of course, David, as you and I have both spoken about at great length many times, there's an ongoing effort to demonize, stigmatize, and thereby destroy all those who stand against jihad mass murder and Sharia oppression. I mean, it's really kind of amazing to me. I was speaking at UCLA recently, last week, and whenever I go to college, I have to spend a lot of time explaining in the talk why jihad terror is a real threat and Islamophobia not so much. Mm-hmm. And there's been a tremendous success in demonizing those who speak out about these issues and making it seem as if there's something wrong with opposing jihad terrorism. Mm-hmm. And then whenever there's an incident like this one, as horrific as it is, the forces of jihad in the West immediately seize on it and try to exploit it in order to shut down any discourse about jihad terror and to make it seem as if there's some sort of direct line between speaking against jihad terror and violence against innocent Muslims, which is patently absurd. Neither you nor I nor anybody that we're associated with actually had anything to do with, have ever condoned any kind of violence. And the idea that if somebody is violent in the cause of some ideology, and then does that discredit the ideology? That would be absurd. I'm sorry, I'm a little scatterbrained, but this has been a pretty stressful day. But the idea is that if this guy was really Islamophobic, so to speak, if this guy really had a hatred for the Muslim presence in New Zealand or wherever, and he did this, then does that discredit all criticism of jihad terror? Or does it mean that jihad terror doesn't exist? That would be absurd. The idea that somebody is violent because of some issue does not discredit the issue. If it did, then nobody would be socialists or communists today. But unfortunately, we're crawling with them.
Mm-hmm. And there is this amazing degree of hypocrisy here. When there is an Islamic terrorist attack, and you've got terrorists, Islamic terrorists, releasing videos, declaring their allegiance to ISIS or some other terrorist group, and saying, hey, you guys are infidels and we're commanded to fight you and to subjugate you, and you're standing in the way of the spread of Islam and you're interfering in Muslim lands, and according to Islam, we have to fight you until we rule over you or you're dead. And we say, well, here are the passages in the Muslim sources that give these exact views. The response is, you bigots, there's no connection whatsoever between what these guys are saying and these crystal clear commands of Allah and Muhammad in Islam's most trusted sources. There's no connection whatsoever, even though we find these commands in the Muslim sources, and even though we have Muslims saying that they are aware of these teachings and that these teachings are the motivating factor in their actions, we're told, no, there's no possible connection, and the only reason you're seeing some sort of connection between someone carrying out a terrorist attack and Islam commanding terrorist attacks, the only reason you're seeing some connection there is because you're a racist. You have to be a racist in order to see obvious connections that any 4-year-old could see. But when we turn around, and you've got a guy here who is an ethno-nationalist. Now, Robert, I've heard you make fun of white nationalists before. In fact, I've got you on video. So all you, if anyone's here and you're a white nationalist and you think Robert's your buddy, keep in mind, Robert does make fun of you, and I have him on video making fun of you. That is a position that you regard as silly, and yet that's, according to the manifesto, that was this man's motivating factor. Was yes. Was white nationalism was the motivating factor. And even there, just to be clear, Robert and I are no fans of white nationalism. I think it's incredibly silly to base the future plans of the world and your strategies on the amount of melanin in your skin. I can't think of too many things that are sillier than that. But even here, we want to be clear. There are plenty of white nationalists who are totally peaceful and don't want to kill or subjugate anyone or cause a war. They believe in peaceful means of doing things. And so if you want to respond to them, then, you respond to their ideology. But you've got a white nationalist here. So that is very, very different from our views. He even says in his manifesto that he's not really concerned with Islam as an ideology. He doesn't care. He's just concerned that Muslims have the highest birth rates and the majority of them are not white. You remember reading that?
Yes, absolutely. And really, well, yeah, you hit the white nationalist thing, but I think it also needs to be stressed that this guy was just trying to stir strife in the society.
Yeah.
That and he is, which is just the opposite of what you and I are trying to do, which is ensure that free societies governed by the rule of law are maintained in the world, that Christians are free to worship, that Jews are free to worship, and so on, without coercion, harassment, jihad, terror, and so on. And this guy, he says, why did you choose to use firearms? He says, for the effect they would have on social discourse. He says, with enough pressure, the left wing within the United States will seek to abolish the Second Amendment. The right wing within the U.S. will see this as an attack on their very freedom and liberty. This attempted abolishment of rights by the left will result in a dramatic polarization of the people in the United States and eventually a fracturing of the U.S. along cultural and racial lines. This is what he wanted. Mm-hmm. And what we want is harmony, peace, and brotherhood between all peoples and mutual respect and the opposition to an ideology that is radically intolerant and against all these things and is supremacist and aggressive at its very core. So the idea that we have something to do with this or that this was carried out according to some ideology that we hold is just a media fantasy designed to aid the ultimate goal of shutting us down completely, mm-hmm. which I do think is coming pretty fast, especially now after this.
And what's really scary is, I've been predicting for years, and I said in my video, it doesn't take a genius to figure out where this is going. Anytime you have two sides that are in some kind of conflict, and one side is using violence, then you'd better be very careful about how the other side is going to react, and make sure that they have sort of peaceful outlet. Yes, there needs to be a military response and a police response to protect people from the violence, but you need to take steps to make sure the other side doesn't become equally violent or more violent. And so just give everyone an idea of what I'm talking about here. Everyone was confused about, back when we had the Arab Spring, or even before that with Saddam gone, in our mindset, in the Western mindset, lots of people thought, hey, if you just get rid of the dictator, if you just get rid of the tyrant in the land, then all the people who want peace and friendship, those people will take over the country, and then everything will be lovely. All the freedom-loving, democracy-loving people will take over. Just get rid of the tyrant. Why do we think like that? Because that's how things worked for us. Not realizing that we had a particular kind of population already, right? You had a population that really did want freedom and democracy and things like that. So we still tend to think, hey, just get rid of Assad, just get rid of Saddam Hussein, just get rid of Gaddafi, just get rid of these guys, just get rid of Mubarak, and then there's going to be peace and democracy there. And then we get rid of these guys, and all of a sudden people start blowing up each other's mosques. You say, wait a minute, why are people blowing up each other's mosques? And the reason was there were already people there who wanted to blow up each other's mosques. They were just scared of the tyrant that you just got rid of. And now they're not scared because you're not going to respond the way the dictator did. And so they're not scared of you. They're not scared of, George Bush or Barack Obama or Donald Trump. And so, And so that's the situation. But here's the situation you have, right? Even if you had a ton of peaceful, Sunnis and Shias in a land, if 1% of those Sunnis and Shias were the sort that wanted to go and kill people from the other side, if 1% were actually violent Sunnis or violent Shias, Then here's the situation. The 1% of Sunnis who were actually violent in that land, they go and they bomb a Shia mosque. And now all of a sudden that 1% of Shias who wanted to go kill Sunnis, now all of a sudden that goes from 1% to 5%. And so you get an attack now on a Sunni mosque, and all of a sudden that 1% of Sunnis who wanted to go out and kill Shias, that goes up to 10%. And so now you get more attacks on the Shia mosques, and then the number of Shias who want a violent retaliation, that increases. And all of a sudden you get this massive escalation almost instantly, and then at the end of it you get ISIS, right?
Yep. Right.
Yeah, and so that's what happens. And so, and by the way, that can happen anywhere. And so, what you don't want here is, well, Muslims keep launching terrorist attacks throughout the world, and well, therefore, we need to just go kill civilians or whoever who are Muslims, just to get back at them, just to show them. That's what you don't want. That's what you don't want to happen.
But David,
Yeah.
it reminds me of that thing John Kennedy said, that when you make
Peaceful.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, peaceful resistance impossible, you make violent resistance inevitable.
Yeah.
Something like that, right?
Yeah.
And this is actually what we're dealing with here.
Mhm.
That already the opposition to jihad terror has been so demonized and stigmatized that you are going to get nuts who think that violence is the only way.
Mhm.
And this is the result of the left's trying to shut down any discourse about this, and the Islamic groups trying to shut down any discourse about this. And they're gonna do it. They're doing it all the more today, with CARE denouncing me and others in hitting this guy. They're going to end up with worse as a result. I'm not saying that that's a good thing. It's actually a bad thing. But it is a direct result of their refusal to deal with this problem adequately, and their absolute intransigence in even admitting that there's a problem with jihad terror and Sharia oppression of women and others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's how this escalation will. Here's what it's going to look like unless someone comes up with some brilliant strategies. But the situation is this. So you have terrorist attacks, Islamic terrorist attacks for years. And I'm not sure what the latest count is, but it's tens of thousands of Islamic terrorist attacks just since 9/11. We're usually most familiar with the terrorist attacks that hit close to home, but they're everywhere. They're around the world. And the situation that you have is people look to their leaders, they look to their governments, they look to journalists to explain what's going on and give a good perspective, and hey, what are we going to do about this? And instead of seeing the government and journalists and educators doing anything that looks like they might be able to solve this problem somehow, instead it's shut up if you're at all concerned about this. You must be a racist, right?
Yep.
So yeah, and
story of my life.
Yeah. So, and the video I posted earlier today, and I posted clips from videos from past years where I predicted that if you keep silencing people and just calling people racist, and I'm saying this because that's exactly what Anders Breivik said in his manifesto. Anders Breivik said exactly that. He said, "You want to know why I turned to violence? It's because when I became concerned about Islam, I thought about going into politics, and I realized that I would simply be called a racist. I would be marginalized. No one would care at all about anything I'm saying. And so I decided that peaceful speech was pointless. It's worse than meaningless. It's a waste of time. The only way to get through is violence." And so that's what Breivik said, right? And guess what? Other people can come to that exact same conclusion. And so this is the terrifying spiral that we're in right now.
And I have to emphasize, it's caused by the left. It's caused by the left and the Islamic advocacy groups in the United States. It is not caused by me or Pamela Geller or you or Donald Trump. It is caused by the absolute stigmatization of any honest discussion of the jihad threat. It's caused by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Council on American Islamic Relations. They're the ones who were responsible for Breivik and their European counterparts, and they're the ones who were responsible for this guy.
And so, just to be clear on that, if people aren't understanding what's going on here, when you have a violent attack, right? You expect the government to, protect you, to take steps to protect you, to make sure people aren't going to bomb you, to do things like that. You want to see your journalists and educators get to the truth of the matter and start getting to the bottom of these things, looking into the sources of the attacks and so on. Instead, all of these sources just call you racist for being concerned about the terrorist attacks, right? And you have people like me and Robert who still believe that there's an important discussion to be had, and that we can eventually solve our problem. Yes, to be clear, you do need to respond to terrorist attacks with your military and police forces and things like that. So we're not just saying, hey, we'll go stand in a corner and talk about this. You need to respond to active terrorists and terrorist threats through government means and so on. But as far as the ideology of Islam, we still believe that you can deal with that ideology as an ideology. You can refute the ideology. You can undermine the ideology. So you can deal with the ideology peacefully. But what's happening is you are ending up with people who don't agree with us, who don't agree. Like they would view what we're doing right now as total waste of time. What are you guys doing talking? You should be out killing and slaughtering. That's what they believe, right? Why are they coming to this conclusion? Why are they coming to the conclusion that it's a waste of time? Well, they look around and they see people who criticize jihad and Muhammad and the Quran and the commands to wage terrorist attacks against unbelievers. They look at these people being deplatformed and so on, and they say, what's the point, right? I could go out and speak out. I'm just going to be shut down. I'm going to be silenced. I'll be deplatformed. I won't be allowed to speak. So it's all a waste of time. But I'm still concerned about my kids. I'm still concerned about the future. I'm still concerned about my civilization. And therefore, I need to act now before it's too late. And these are the guys who are going out waging terrorist attacks. So these are scary times because, the escalation is this, right? You have jihadis waging terrorist attacks, but now you have people who are responding, well, I'm going to go to your mosque and kill you. And then what happens? Well, now the jihadist recruiters and radicalizers who are going to Muslims saying, hey, you need to join our terrorist group. Now they say, look, you see, they're even coming into your mosques, killing and slaughtering people. You are not safe among them. You have to fight back. So now they use that to radicalize more people who go launch more terrorist attacks. And since speech is being shut down, people are being deplatformed. What happens? More non-Muslims conclude that they have to fight against violence with more violence, and so they go attack more Muslims. And then, what do you do there? What do you do? Just a horrifying situation.
What you're going to end up with is just what this crazy shooter in New Zealand wanted: the fracturing of the U.S. along cultural and racial lines, civil war, all sorts of strife, rioting, killing in the streets, all sorts of things. And this is what's coming. I think that it's only a matter of time now. I fully expect that there will be a lot of pressure put on the social media giants and the other powerful forces in our society today, the controllers of the means of communication, to close me out, close out you, close everybody down who is talking about these things. I was on Twitter earlier with talking with this fellow, Muslim Matters. I don't know who's behind that account, but he's got 310,000 followers, and he was calling for me to be banned from everything. All the platforms, and I think that's common. Of course, it's been a long-standing effort. They've already done this with other voices that people think, well, they're a little bit crazy, so they don't mind. Alex Jones they banned, and well, maybe Alex Jones they think is a little nutty, so that's okay. Or somebody else is banned. Milo is banned, and well, he's a bit outrageous. And so these people just don't bat an eye, and they don't realize what's coming. But it's really like Pastor Niemöller said during World War II. First they came for this group and that group, but I wasn't a member of this group or that group, so I didn't mind. I didn't do anything. And when they came for me, there was nobody left to speak out. And this is the same kind of thing that's happening or going to happen here. I wouldn't be in the least surprised if I wake up tomorrow and I'm all shut out of everything. If not now, it'll be soon. This is the way things are going, and there is unfortunately not a whole lot of pushback against this tendency right now. among people who are aware of this issue.
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, and by the way, I'm thinking the same thing. Wouldn't surprise me at all to see myself deplatformed, even though I've spent years condemning violence, even though the reason we're against Islamic terrorism is because it's terrorism, and Islam is just the ideology that promotes it most vehemently and most clearly, and the one that people are most terrified of speaking out against. And so we think, oh, someone has to do it. Might as well just be us then. And so we respond to it because we're against violence, we're against bloodshed. And what's the response? Well, you guys are responsible for the bloodshed. And I'm not exaggerating here. Here's a comment. David Wood, you are killer. Today's blood in your hands. So the blood is in my hands. And why is that?
Yeah, getting that all day myself.
Yeah. And so think about this. The guy's motivation. Oh, yeah, people are responding. Yeah, David Wood somehow was the one who shot up the mosque. But notice the idea, right? The the Christchurch shooter was his ideology was fundamentally different from ours. I've never heard Robert say one word that could be associated with white nationalism. And I've never heard Robert say one word about having to go out and slaughter people in order to enforce his position. I've never said those things. And yet you've got a white nationalist who says he doesn't care. He doesn't care about the ideology. He's not. See, I care about the ideology. That's my main concern. Couldn't conceivably care less about ethnic issues and stuff like that. I mean, to be clear, I care about ethnic issues when they're harmful issues. But as far as like making white people the only people in an area, I think that's totally ridiculous.
Yes.
So we don't have that ideology, and we don't. We advocate peaceful means. So in what way did this guy get this idea from us? In what way would this guy go out here and kill because of things that we've said? And here's another comment. The main reason for today's attack is your spreading of hate and radicalizing Islam. Hey,
you
Robert,
radicalized Islam?
we radicalized Islam.
That's quite a job. You know, I think it's a funny thing. It's in a certain sense, it's a tribute that these people think we are so powerful, David. It's incredible. That they think that we are actually responsible for people thinking ill of Islam. Islam does a tremendous job of making people think ill of it without our help. Nidal Malik Hassan and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and Osama bin Laden, and I could just name the Tsarnaev brothers, and I can name jihad terrorists for the next 30 minutes without repeating myself. There have been 34,000 lethal jihad terror attacks worldwide since 9/11, and they think that you and I are such skillful propagandists that this perfectly benign thing, this cuddly religion that teaches brotherhood and tolerance, everybody would love it, David, if it weren't for our nefarious powers.
Yeah.
It's astonishing the credit that they give us in this backhanded way. It doesn't have anything to do with jihad terrorism. Nobody minds that. Everybody knows it's a religion of peace. It's only when we come along and start saying, hey, Islam teaches kill them wherever you find them. And when you meet the unbeliever, strike the necks. Nobody cares about that. It's only when we point it out it's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's think, because there are two possibilities here. If we're the ones who are, as this gentleman says, if we're the ones radicalizing Islam, there are two ways we might have gone about this. One, we might go to Muslims and then say, Islam means submission, and since Islam means submission, that means, how do you submit to Allah? You submit to Allah by obeying His commands and the commands of Muhammad found in the Hadith. And so what does Muhammad command? What does Allah command? Well, that depends on where you are and what situation you're in. But at the end of the day, once you're in a position to wage jihad against unbelievers, then you are required as a Muslim to do that so that Islam can be the religion over everyone, dominating everyone. And so you don't, as a Muslim, get to reinterpret that. You are supposed to obey what Allah and Muhammad said. And if a Muslim agrees with us and
36.
says, wow, Islam does mean submission, and so I do need to do what Allah says, therefore I need to obey the commands of Allah to violently subjugate the entire world, that's us radicalizing them. That's us radicalizing them. So that's one way we could
There's one little thing
radicalizing them.
there, though, David. There's one little thing. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, of course, as you and I very well know, Muslims don't learn about Islam from non-Muslims.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Muslims don't
I'm
respect non-Muslims in terms of their authority to tell them about Islam.
Yeah,
There was a guy a few years back. He's dead now, but he was one of the early propagandists of this theory on the internet. And I remember reading once he actually wrote that Hamas terrorists were reading my books and articles and being radicalized as a result.
Watching David Wood videos. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm not familiar with a totally peaceful Muslim going to Robert Spencer and saying, wow, Islam does promote terrorism. I guess I'll go out and be a terrorist. So that's one way we could have radicalized Islam. We somehow went and started these terrorist organizations by convincing Muslims that Allah means what he says and not something completely different. So the alternative here is that Allah is the worst communicator in all of history. Muhammad is the worst communicator in all of history. When Muhammad said that he has been made victorious with terror, he didn't really mean it. He was just a bad communicator. That's what I guess that's what true Islam is. And shame on us for telling people no, Allah claims to be perfectly clear, and you'd better believe him. So that's one possibility of how we radicalized Islam. The other way we could have radicalized Islam is if we're actually brilliant scientists who invented time machines and went back and inserted all of these teachings into Islam's most trusted sources.
Yeah, so, I've gotten that one too, David. Professor Khalil Muhammad of San Diego State University, I believe that's where he is. This was many years ago, but he actually claimed, he was writing an attack on me, and he said he actually claims that Muhammad married his daughter-in-law. Now I thought, wow, this guy thinks that I wrote the early Muslim sources and chapter 33 of the Quran, which is all about how Muhammad gets the permission from Allah to marry his daughter-in-law, Zainab bint Jahsh. And this is something that he is, and this gives Zainab this marvelous distinction that she was married to Muhammad by Allah himself, whereas the others were married in earthly marriages. Mm-hmm. This is, it's amazing that he thinks I wrote the Sirat Rasulullah mm-hmm. of Ibn Ishaq. I wrote the 33rd chapter of the Quran, maybe more of it. Mm-hmm. But of course, they rely on the ignorance of Westerners who don't know what's in the Quran and don't know what's in Islamic teaching. And they can't really believe that it really does have all these things in it. And so they think that they can just lie this brazenly and that we will be considered to be just hateful bigots who are making this stuff up. And actually, I'm sure that they're probably right. I actually remember another one, Hussein Ibish, the mountainous defender of Palestine. He, many years ago, was on a radio show with me, and I was saying that there's so much anti-Semitism in the Quran, and this leads to a lot of the hatred that the Palestinians have for Israel, and one of the reasons why there can never be a successful negotiated settlement. And I said, the Quran says that the Jews were transformed into apes and pigs, and Ibish actually said, the Quran doesn't say that. And I said, it's chapter 5, verse 59 and 60. And he said, it's not in the Quran. And then he actually wrote an article saying that this was not in the Quran. And I think that he's really counting on people not opening up the Quran mm-hmm. and finding out what's really in it. And I'm sure that he was right, that most people just figured, oh, here's the Muslim who knows what's in the Quran, and here's this wicked hate monger who is making up things about the Quran. Mm-hmm. And this is it's a very skillful use of and extraordinarily brazen mm-hmm. use of propaganda.
Yeah, I call this the 99-1 rule. Namely, that if you have 100 people and you know that 99 of them are not going to go look up what you're saying and they're going to mindlessly believe what you're saying, and that one person might go look it up, but that the 99 will shout him down if he starts contradicting what you've said. Just doing what you're doing, and you eventually win. And that's how Muhammad spread his religion. He knows, hey, I could go around saying, hey, the Torah and the Gospel contain clear prophecies about me. The Torah and the Gospel talk about me coming all the time, right? His followers who believe everything he says are just going to believe that. And if you're a Christian or Jew who eventually raises your hand and says, wait a minute, that's not true, well, they just chop your head off for contradicting Muhammad. So you can
Or
just,
they say you've corrupted your scriptures.
yep,
You removed all the evidence of Muhammad.
yep,
You took all the things out about how Jesus is saying Muhammad's going to come and he's the man.
yep.
Because you were so wicked, you even tampered with the scriptures you received from Allah. And this is, of course, mainstream Islamic teaching about Judaism and Christianity, because it's the only way to square that circle.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only way to make Muhammad correct and the Quran correct, because they say they confirm the Torah and the gospel. They don't. So we must have changed the Torah and the gospel.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's check out some comments here. We do want to read comments from Muslims. And by the way, guys, there's a reason, right? Robert was pointing out that there's basically one side of this entire discussion that's responsible for trying to shut down, stifle the conversation, and that's what leads very often to violence. People are giving up on discussing the issue because they find out they're being silenced in all kinds of ways. But
Or they don't have the guts for it. They think, if I speak out about this, I'll be called a racist, a bigot, an Islamophobe, and they're afraid. They don't want to be tarred. They don't want to have their names dragged through the mud like that. It's certainly understandable.
Yeah, but notice what happens here, right? So there was a terrorist attack, and we are happy to go live, discuss the terrorist attack, point out where, draw attention to the person's ideology, show where the person got that ideology, and try and figure out how we can address this issue to stop the problem from continuing in the future. We don't want to see Muslims getting killed. We don't want to see Muslims getting killed in mosques and so on. We don't want to see these things. So we do need to get to the bottom of that. So we're right here, and we are live, and people are free to raise questions and objections. Imagine that after an Islamic terrorist attack, right? Imagine Muslims getting on stage and saying, all right, guys, we are here. We want to discuss this. These guys, these terrorists, they claimed that they're doing this because of the teachings of Allah and Muhammad. So let's get together and get to the bottom of this. Let's go through our sources and see what our sources really teach. I would love to see that. But instead it's, hey, there was a terrorist attack today. Bunch of unbelievers were killed by people claiming to do it in the name of Allah. But we know that's not true. And anyone who says otherwise is a racist and needs to be deplatformed. Otherwise, we're going to get killed. Muslims are going to get killed. And that's what happens. And then people start rushing to silence people from talking about the Islamic terrorist attack. Well, no one's doing that now. No one wants to silence discussion of this now. Instead, they want to silence any discussion of Islam at all.
Yeah.
That's what's going on. All right.
You point out an important thing there also, David, that's something that very often happens. Actually, it invariably happens. Mm-hmm. And I note it at Jihad Watch from day to day. Whenever there is a jihad terror attack and people are killed or some major plot that's uncovered, then the establishment media, the next day, it's inevitable, there will be stories about how the Muslims are the real victims of this attack. The mosque, the local mosque where the shooter attended or whatever, is bracing for a backlash of Islamophobic attacks, which of course never materialize. And we really have to be more solicitous of the Muslim community as a result of this attack. And so when Muslims kill non-Muslims, Muslims are the victims. Mm-hmm. And when non-Muslims kill Muslims, Muslims are the victims. It's always working in the way of justifying Islamic terror and turning a blind eye to it and demonizing those who call attention to it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sad situation. And for those of you who are here, and I know some of you are here who want that to continue. I know there are people here who want that interpretation of every event to continue. If there's an Islamic terrorist attack, if jihadis kill unbelievers in the name of Allah, you want to portray Muslims as the victims of that, just as in the attack in Australia, where Muslims actually are the victims. You want Muslims to be the victims in every case, because that allows you to silence critics. For those of you who want that, you might want to rethink that, because that's why you're getting these attacks on Muslims. So if you really don't want Muslims to be killed, you should be taking steps to make sure that people still believe in discussing ideologies peacefully and not giving up on any sort of open, honest discussion or criticism or even mockery or ridicule. Right? Keep in mind, people who think, oh no, if they mock me, if they mock my religion, that's the end of the world. No, there are worse things than mocking your religion, namely going on a killing spree. So. Yeah, if you get really, really concerned about an ideology and you really, really don't like it, Well, make fun of it then. Make fun of it then, but don't go on a killing spree. All right, Robert. Now here's an objection from Salmon Player.
Okay.
So this is a Muslim objection. He said, David, Muslims had half of the world in their hands for centuries, including Israel. If the Quran says, kill every Jew, even those that hide behind the stones, then how come that Robert is alive? So how come Robert is alive? So let's start with the most obvious problem here. Robert, are you a Jew?
I am not. I
Okay.
do not have that honor.
Yeah. Now, have you ever claimed that the Quran orders Muslims to kill every Jew that they get hold of?
Quran does not say that. The Quran never says to kill every Jew. Neither do the Hadith.
Mm-hmm. And so, so notice this is a misrepresentation. We hear this all the time, right? Because
yes, straw man that is so often invoked that people. I can't tell you if I'd be a rich man if I had $1 for every time somebody said to me, "The Quran does not say kill all the non-Muslims," and you are wrong to say the Quran says kill all the non-Muslims. Never said this. It doesn't say that.
Yeah, there's I've been wanting to make a video because I watched a clip of Yusuf Estes, convert to Islam, who's a Muslim apologist now.
There's an honest man.
Yusuf Estes. It even put the question on the screen. The question on the screen was, does the Quran advocate violence towards Jews and Christians? Now, would you say that the Quran advocates violence towards Jews and Christians?
Certainly, absolutely. Chapter 9, verse 29. Fight against those who do not obey Allah and his messenger, and do not forbid what he has forbidden, even if they are of the people of the book, Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. That is clear incitement to violence against Jews and Christians.
So we would say that, but here, this was, I think this was on the Dean show. And so that's the question that popped up. And Yusuf Estes responded, just as you pointed out, with the straw man. He says, okay, so people say, why does the Quran command to kill all Jews and Christians? Well, let me go ahead and respond to that. Nowhere does the Quran say kill all Jews and Christians. And he proceeds to pretend that was the actual question that was asked. And so it's not surprising at all for people like Salmon Player to say, oh, okay, you're saying that the Quran says kill every Jew. And then he goes on to say, even those that hide behind the stones. Now, he's confusing what's in the Quran with what's in the Hadith there. What is he referring to without actually knowing what his sources say? What is this with killing those even that hide behind the stones?
Well, that's the Hadith. It's in Sahih Muslim. It's in Bukhari. It's repeated many times. It says that the Muhammad says the end times will not come until Muslims kill Jews. And the Jews hide behind trees, and the trees cry out, "Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." Except the Garkad tree, which is the tree of the Jews. And there's, of course, as you know, a lot of wonderful absurdities about this, with Muslim spokesmen saying the Israelis are all planting Garkad trees in their yards to ward off this happening. And I just recently came across an imam preaching about this and actually saying that a prime minister of Israel had said, he didn't name which one, had said that this, yes, of course, we know that hadith is true, but we're just trying to prevent it from happening. But it doesn't say Muslims will kill all the Jews. It says that Muslims can help to bring on the end times by killing Jews. The end times will not come until Muslims kill Jews.
So that's something. That's a hadith about the end times. As far as what the Quran actually says, the Quran encourages Muslims to fight against Jews and Christians until we are subdued, until we become dhimmis, until we acknowledge our inferiority and pay the jizya. Is that an accurate representation of what we claim that the Quran says?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is something that we see working out throughout history. In 1400 years of jihad all over the globe, from Spain to India, you had Muslims conquering non-Muslims and then making them into second-class, a second-class group that had to pay the tax, the jizya, and submit to various other humiliating and discriminatory regulations. It was not until the 1850s, when the Ottoman Empire abolished the dhimma, the system of Dimitude, under pressure from the Western powers because they needed their help in the Crimean War, that this system came to an end. But it is still part of Islamic law, and the Islamic State, ISIS, revived it in their own domains and made the Christians pay the jizya and submit to various other points of discrimination. So these things are very real. We didn't write them, we didn't make them up, but they do not amount to killing all the non-Muslims. So the question, as this fellow has, about the Muslims had half of the world in their hands for centuries. They didn't kill the non-Muslims because they were subdued, they were submissive, they were paying the jizya, they were a source of income for the Muslims, and consequently that was not right. Muhammad even says, "Don't kill them," because they're a source of the livelihood for the Muslims.
So Salmon Player, basically the situation you have when Muslims are able to subjugate Jews and Christians, force them to pay. They're your source of income, right? That's your revenue. Why would you want to kill Jews who are paying you money? Why would you want to go out? Yeah. Why would you want to kill a bunch of Jews who are giving you money on a regular basis? And Robert, if I recall correctly from your amazing book, The History of Jihad, as new Muslim rulers would arise in areas, if they were in an area where they thought that Jews weren't behaving as good subjugated people, if they did not really understand their inferiority, wouldn't new Muslim rulers come up and start cracking down on the Jews and saying, "Hey, you guys aren't understanding who's really in power here"?
Yeah, absolutely. The most notorious incident was in 1066 in Granada, in wonderful, tolerant Muslim Spain, where one of the Muslim rulers, who was not following Islamic law, he appointed one of his friends, who was a Jew, to a position of power in the city. And the Muslims in the city were then incited to violence and killed 4,000 Jews in Granada, because the people doing the inciting, they knew that it was against Islamic law for Jews to hold authority over Muslims, that this ruler should not have appointed the Jew into a position of power, and that the Jews had to be killed because they were forfeiting the dhimma. They were not obeying the command to submit and feel themselves subdued. And so this is something also that happened in Egypt in the 17th century, and so on, that there were Muslim rulers, visitors who came from North Africa, a little farther west of Egypt, and went into Egypt and were appalled that the Jews and the Christians were not being mistreated sufficiently. They had too many rights. And they called upon the Egyptian rulers to redress this situation. And so that is something that recurs throughout Islamic history, that there are periods of laxity, periods of tolerance where the non-Muslims are not suffering sufficiently, and then there are other Muslim hardliners who come into power and make sure that they do. Because after all, as the Quran says in chapter 9, verse 14, "Fight them and Allah will punish them through your hands." So the Muslims are the executors of the wrath of Allah on earth, and it's their responsibility to make sure that the non-Muslims are suffering.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Salmon Player, I hope that answers your objection, which was flawed in almost every possible way. Yeah, so and Salmon Player, just keep in mind, there's a situation where we just had a terrorist attack, right? There's bad stuff going on in the world, and the inclination to just go out and blame anyone who criticizes Islam is silly. Just as it's silly, although I'm not aware of anyone who does this. But after an Islamic terrorist attack, if someone were to start going out to random Muslims and blaming them for things, well, you agree with the ideology, so you're responsible for the terrorist attack, or you preach Islam and Islam leads to terrorist attacks. That's the objection we hear after every Islamic terrorist attack. Oh, you're blaming all Muslims. Well, I don't know anyone who's blaming all Muslims for terrorist attacks, but the idea that a white nationalist eco-fascist who describes himself as possibly left-wing, possibly right-wing, and semi-socialist, who decided to abandon all speech and just go on a killing spree in order to have people like us silenced so that people would start turning more to violence. They would his entire idea. Robert, this is what I find most terrifying, right? Because it's pretty easy to predict human behavior in a lot of situations, right? If
Yeah.
you keep going after someone and targeting them, and they start worrying about their kids and their families and so on, and there's no way for them to even discuss it, I can predict that some of those people are gonna end up wanting to do some bad things. I can predict behavior like that. What's terrifying about this guy is that he's sitting back saying, okay, how is this group going to react if this happens, and how is that group going to react if that happens? Well, the thing I can do to get everyone into an eventual war is, if I go and kill a bunch of Muslims, then everyone's going to use that to ban guns, to ban speech, and that's going to cause more people to become violent like me. So they're going to go become violent, which will lead to more guns banned, and more bans on speech, and more deplatforming, which will lead to more violence. And pretty soon everyone's killing each other. And that's the only way. That's the only way to stop the slow erosion of the white race. That's this guy's thinking. And
And
so,
that's what's going to happen. That's what they're going to get.
yeah, no, I mean, it's absolutely amazing. We're to a point where he can sit there and send everyone, guys, here was my plan. I am so confident. This is what the guy's saying. So don't take this clip out and say, oh, this is what David Wood is saying. He's saying, hey, I am so confident that you people are so predictable in every way that I will go in there, kill a bunch of people, and I will tell you exactly what my plan is, and you're still going to do exactly what I want. I will tell the world that my plan in going out and killing these people is that this attack will be used to silence and deplatform people who I ultimately want on my side, right? And so they're going to become angrier and angrier that you're silencing them. They're going to increasingly turn to violence, and so they're going to increasingly agree with me and my violent means. And what happens? Exactly what the guy just said, right? It is. I've always been amazed when I used to see this with Milo, right? When Milo would go to a college campus and he would say, hey, I'm going to go on the college campus and they're all going to shout me down. They're going to storm the stage and all that. I'm going to think. And I was sitting there thinking, no, they're not. You just told them they would. They obviously can't do it now when you just told them they would. They're going to do the opposite of what you told them. And then they would go and do exactly what he said they would do. And it really seems like you get to a position where people don't know anything else, right? They have no other method of dealing with anything. And so you can tell them they're going to do it and they still have no choice but to do it, because that's the only solution they know of.
Yep. And we are standing on the hull of the burning ship, because all this is coming down, and the people who claim to be trying to stamp it out are making it happen, and it's all going to continue to come down on them in exactly this way. And they would never and will never acknowledge that we have a point. You know, there's not going to be any reaction to this video from somebody saying, well, you know, I thought you guys were terrible and I was wanting to get you guys shut down, but you convinced me that you were a reasonable voice. There's not going to be any of that as a result of this. And they're just going to continue to defame and smear those who stand against jihad terror. And so they're going to get more people like this madman in New Zealand, and then they're going to blame us more and shut us down even further. And you know, the guy, the Muslim Matters guy today on Twitter, he was saying, you know, I have to be banned from everything and thrown out of all polite society. And I asked him, well, what then? What if I keep going after that? Should I be jailed or just killed outright? And this kind of thing is really coming, and the people who are lighting the matches and setting the fires are going to continue to do so. Mm-hmm. But it ain't us. It is those who are foreclosing on any possibility of having a rational discussion about the reality of the jihad threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the situation we find ourselves in right now. Just to clarify for everyone, right? You have different kinds of groups that can be concerned about Islam or immigration or whatever people might be concerned about. You have people like me and Robert who are counter jihadists, right? We respond to jihad. Why do we respond to jihad? Because we don't like violence. We don't like killing. That's why we respond to it. If enough people responded to it, I would go and do something else. I respond to it because there are very few people who actually respond to this. So that's why I'm involved in this. That's my concern, right? It's something that keeps getting people killed. So you want to, and the first step in getting anything done about jihad is getting people to know where it's being taught and its source and its origin, right? As long as people are completely ignorant, you can't figure out where this is coming from, well, no one's going to be able to do anything about it. So you have the counter jihad. Then you also have things like the white nationalist movement, right? And you do have perfectly, I mean, the vast majority of counter jihadists are perfectly peaceful people. You could occasionally get someone who's concerned about jihad and decides to go out on a killing spree, right? You could have tons of completely peaceful white nationalists, and then you might get someone who goes out on a killing spree. But the idea that you would say that, hey, if you eventually get a white nationalist who goes on a killing spree, therefore the peaceful counter jihadists, the people who are horrified at violence, they're the ones who are responsible for his white nationalism and his decision to turn to violence, is so absurd. And then the fact that you turn right around, and if a Muslim says, hey, I'm killing in the name of Allah because Allah commands me to go out and violently subjugate the entire world, and you people are in my way, and you'll say that has nothing to do with Islam. It's so absurd that, and the fact that this is the dominant position, position on the left, right?
Yes, it is.
An Islamic terrorist attack. An Islamic terrorist attack that a jihadi got right off the pages of the Quran or Hadith can't possibly have anything to do with Islam. But any person of any ideology who kills a Muslim for any reason, it must be Robert Spencer.
Yeah, it's silly, it's absurd, it's ridiculous, but this is the situation that we're in, and I wonder what these people think. Their end game is becoming increasingly obvious. That if everybody who resists jihad terror, everybody who nonviolently says we need to have legal, constitutional, rational responses to the jihad terror threat, if everybody who says that is shut down, is defamed as a racist and an Islamophobe and discredited and silenced, deplatformed and so on, then the jihad will advance. There will continue to be jihadis who will continue to kill people, and there will be nobody who has the courage to oppose them, because everybody who is opposing them has been silenced and destroyed. And so the jihad will advance unopposed and unimpeded. And as I kept asking the Muslim Matters guy today, is that your end game? Is that really what you want? Because if it isn't, then there has to be some rational response to the jihad threat. But that's what we have been offering all these years and have only been defamed as a result of it.
Yeah, and just sad situation. That, I mean, think about it, guys. You have people who are concerned about Islam. That's just a fact. And that concern doesn't come from us. That comes from things like terrorism. That's why people are concerned about Islam. They see an endless stream of terrorist attacks, right? They see buildings coming down. They see mass shootings. They see vehicular attacks. And they see it all over the world. They see it in America. They see it in Great Britain. They see it in France. They see it in Spain. They see it in Africa. They see it in the Middle East. They see it in Asia. They see it everywhere, right? Everywhere Islam goes, you get terrorist attacks. But you have people like me and Robert and anyone we work with who say, hey, we need to focus on dealing with the ideology. Don't become violent in return, except where it is necessary to stop a jihadi group or something like that. We're the ones telling people not to become violent in retaliation. And we're the ones that everyone is trying to silence. What happens if you silence the people who are telling people not to become violent in retaliation? What happens that is the idea? I think the theory is, well, then everyone's concerns about Islam are going to go away. No, they're not.
Yeah,
Concerns are
because
still.
we made them up.
Yeah.
Yes.
The concerns
There
about
are terrorists,
yeah,
really.
the concerns about Islam are still going to be there. Only there aren't going to be any people getting together and discussing these things and saying, hey, here's how we can deal with Islam in a peaceful manner. You're not going to have that. Instead, you're going to have these sort of isolated factions of individuals who can't even discuss anything online. And some of those groups of people, since they can no longer discuss anything on any public platform, are going to discuss what to do in their own little groups. And you are going to get a lot of bloodshed. And
Yes.
that is what we want to avoid. And so it's just amazing that we can spend and dedicate our entire lives to to doing something to reduce the amount of violence in the world. And the conclusion of people who are aware of us is these are the guys who want a bloodbath. These are the guys who want an epic bloodbath between Muslims and the rest of the world.
Yes. Well, I think they know. I don't really think that they are that stupid. I think they're evil. That they want to shut down free speech. They want to control the public discourse. We interfere with the plans of the left for their globalist socialist utopia and with the plans of the jihadis for a caliphate and the destruction of non-Muslim governments. And so we have to be thrown out of the way. We have to be discredited and destroyed. And well, they're doing it. They're doing very well with it. And we will see if they succeed in exploiting this horrific incident in order to further their goals. But no good will come of what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. All right, deal with a couple questions right now. Snakehead4 says, people are saying this guy was a Christian, yet he said he wasn't sure. How would you not know if you're a Christian or not? So I also read that in the manifesto. You're familiar with that, Robert, right? Where he said something
Yes.
like, am I a Christian? He says, it's complicated. I guess I'll figure it out later. He said something like that.
Which is essentially saying he isn't. No Christian would answer that way.
Yeah. Just like a Muslim wouldn't answer that way. So
Exactly.
I think the idea there is maybe I have some sort of, cultural Christian background where I'm from a Christian area, because that is what I've heard atheists refer to themselves as cultural Christians and things like that. So you say, are you Christian? Well, it depends on what you mean. No, I don't actually believe it, but I've been influenced by it or something like that. But
Yeah.
I mean, at the very least, even if this guy had said, I'm a Christian, I am doing this in the name of Christ. Well, you would have to be a severely delusional Christian with a lot of problems to think that you were doing that in some consistent manner with Christianity. Robert, are you familiar
Yeah,
with? Go ahead.
David, if I might add, it's ridiculous. Even if he says he's a Christian, which he doesn't, it doesn't matter because there is no justification in any Christian teaching for doing this. And so it would be rather like it's kind of a reverse that this guy's even wondering if he's a Christian. It's a reverse of what we always get, that Muslims scream Allahu Akbar and commit violence in the name of Islam and in accord with its teachings, and we're told it has nothing to do with Islam. But somebody who kills people and might say he's a Christian, this is just a hypothetical because he doesn't actually even do that. But if there's any suspicion that he's a Christian, then Christianity is responsible for this, even though there's nothing in Christianity that teaches to do anything like this. But it's just more of this topsy-turvy craziness that we are all marinating in.
Yeah, and you'll remember that Anders Breivik was portrayed as a Christian for many years by the media. It's a Christian terrorist, Christian terrorist who killed all of these people. And what Breivik actually said in his manifesto was, he says, basically, I have to decide between Odinism and Christianity. I think if I claim Christianity, I'll be able to win a more widespread audience. So I'm going to call myself a Christian, and said he doesn't even know if God exists and things like that. But that was enough to classify him as a Christian. And then later in an article for an interview, he acknowledged he's never been a Christian in any sense. And yet, this is not. Yeah, this is the guy who was rammed down our throats as a Christian. But on this issue, since you've gone through the manifesto, this is a guy who really, because where'd that comment go? People were pointing out. Oh yeah, here we go. That he was appealing to Valhalla. He said, "I'll see you in Valhalla."
That's right. Yeah.
At the end. So here it seems like a guy who's just messing with everyone. Like his appeal to Candace Owens.
Yeah,
Um,
that was clearly just trolling. And I mean, I'm sorry for her, but
yeah,
the idea
yeah,
that
because you know what that feels like.
oh yeah, I
Yeah.
certainly do.
Mhm.
But the idea that a this deranged, violent white nationalist is inspired by a nonviolent black conservative, it's absurd on its face, and it just shows how deranged the left has become that anybody is taking it seriously.
Yeah. So here's a guy who is obviously, and I mean obviously, messing with everybody, saying, well, he's right wing depending on your definition, and he's left wing depending on your definition, and he's a socialist, and he's this, and he's that, and going down the list of, um, he's basically got something in there that anyone who hates anyone can point to and say, aha, this guy represents you, right? And so he's putting all of these things together, but apparently during the shooting, he was yelling, "Subscribe to PewDiePie," right? Knowing that that's going to get a big reaction. And then in his manifesto said that the person who influenced him most on these issues was Candace Owens. And if you're not familiar with Candace Owens, she's basically someone who mainly tells Black Americans that they shouldn't have this undying allegiance to the Democratic Party.
And he
Um,
said that she was a little too extreme for him, but he couldn't go along with all her extremist ideas.
now,
It was obviously just pulling everybody's leg.
mhm.
But you're right. He praises Trump and then he slams Trump
Mm-hmm.
in successive sentences. And so, of course, the establishment media says he's a Trump follower because they hate Trump and they want to destroy him. But it's clear this guy. There's no coherent manifesto here. He was just he is clearly just wanting to increase the strife in the society, and of course, he's succeeded very well.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Jozo, and this really goes back to the fact that he can tell people all of this. He can say, "Here's exactly what I'm doing, and here's how you're going to respond, and here's how I want you to respond," and then people will do exactly what he says.
Yep.
Absolutely amazing. Jozo said he said he's not conservative. He trolls with Candace. He was a white racist. So I think he's
Oh,
clearly.
and
Oh, go
he
ahead.
admires China. China is his favorite country. So
Yep.
China, of course, probably because of its authoritarianism, but certainly not anything having to do with American conservatism or anything of this kind.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the media sees what they want to see.
All right. Looks like we need to deal with someone here.
What do we got?
Dr. Sanguine Sunrise says, David Wood, as inspired by your words as I am, as in awe of your theological knowledge that I am, I feel your approach is erroneous. It is tantamount to willing capitulation.
How's that? I don't get it.
I think what he's, well, I think this is a person who believes that the only response is a violent one, that we would have to go out and massacre Muslims or something like that. And therefore,
Well, then we should utterly repudiate Dr. Sanguine Sunrise and rebuke him and tell him that he is going down an evil path that can bring no good to himself or to anybody else.
yeah. So, yeah, guys, why do you think you cannot deal with Islam as an ideology? I remember 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it was very rare to see vocal ex-Muslims, right? There were not a lot of vocal ex-Muslims a little over a decade ago. Now they're everywhere. They're all over Twitter. They're all over YouTube. Ex-Muslims like the apostate prophet, like Abdullah Samir, both of whom will be with me in a little while on more live streams tonight. But uh, now everywhere, there are entire communities of ex-Muslims. Why? How did things change that fast? Well, it's the situation you've had is for 14 centuries, Muslims have been isolated, have been insulated from hearing criticisms of Islam or from hearing a serious presentation of alternatives to Islam. And if you do that, and you're in an environment where any sort of disagreement with the prevailing Islamic authority will get you killed, you're not going to get a lot of people leaving. You're not going to get apostates when being an apostate will get you killed. So that's one situation. Now all of a sudden you have lots of Muslims in the West, and you have the rise of the internet, where now Muslims, even in these areas that are still dominated by Islam, even Muslims in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and so on, are now quite aware of many criticisms of Islam. because anyone with an internet connection now has access to them. So keep in mind that just happened. That opportunity for Muslims around the world to hear actual facts about Islam that aren't filtered for them by their leaders, that's new. That's brand new. The other thing that happened is for 14 centuries, critics haven't had the Muslim sources. There are rare exceptions, but certainly not where you can go on and get the Muslim sources on the internet. Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim were translated in like the 80s or 90s, right? So this
Yes.
is, and those are the main sources. You've had more sources translated since then. So this is actually the first generation of people who can reach Muslims around the world, anywhere where there's an internet connection. And we're the first generation that has open access to their sources to go and refute their ideology. Why, in the name of common sense, would you think, nope, you just can't refute their ideology, it'll never work? Why would you think that? It's never been tried. And before you go
That's
on
right.
advocating a global bloodbath of 1.6 billion people, you might want to rethink that. You might want to think, oh, maybe we should try and refute it as an ideology. Because, Robert, I think like this: if you've got all these ex-Muslims coming out and things like that, and it's in an environment where the entire political front is telling them Islam is wonderful, and all of Hollywood is telling them that Islam is wonderful, and the entire education system is telling them that Islam is wonderful, and journalists basically everywhere are telling them that Islam is wonderful, and they're still realizing that Islam is false. Just imagine what would happen if everyone could suddenly be honest about Islam and people could talk about the history of the Quran, and you could be on nightly news programs regularly talking about jihad and the history of Muhammad, and the history of the Quran. I don't think Islam would be anywhere near the threat that it is now if we could just
Indeed,
talk openly about this.
Indeed, you're absolutely right. The Well, my experience has been very similar to yours. That I've encountered many Muslims who've told me, or ex-Muslims who've told me, that they began to study the Quran. They began to research, sometimes even to refute what I was saying,
Mm-hmm.
and they found out that it was true and left Islam.
Yep.
That was a blogger, Samir Parker. He had this response to me online for quite some time, supposedly showing that everything I was saying about Islam was false. And then one day, without any warning, he scrubbed his website and left a note there saying, "I realized that Spencer's right, and I'm leaving Islam, and I'm closing down this website." And the fact is that he just did not realize that these things were really in the texts. But when Muslims do, Muslims of goodwill, many times, they will turn against terrorism and turn against jihad violence and Sharia oppression and renounce the whole thing. So yes, it is possible to have a peaceful, nonviolent, open discussion about these things that will lead to people being less violent and less inclined to endorse violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so foreclosing on that discussion is extraordinarily unwise. And it's like lighting a fuse on a powder keg. There's only going to be violence as a result.
Yeah, and so here's the situation, right? There just a decade ago, there weren't a lot of public critics about Islam. Now there are a bunch, and I hope we get enough to where me and Robert can go do something else because there are roughly 10,000 things I would rather be doing than being
Yeah.
threatened with bloody death and have my wife threatened with rape and so on regularly. I would rather be
Yes.
doing something else. But the situation that we're in is, I look at this, and by the way, you could look at this in two ways. You could look at this from a completely secular, natural perspective, or you could look at this from a perspective of divine providence. When we look at Islamic growth rates and things like that, birth rates, the spread of Islam, and we look at the predictions for the next few decades and how Islam will be taking over as the world's dominant religion. We're just a few decades away at current rates of growth and so on. And then
Yeah.
in that situation, all of a sudden, we get everything we need to refute Islam as an ideology. Right? All of a sudden, it's put in our hands. Guys, all of a sudden, right now, you get open access to the entire world, every Muslim country. And at the same time, you get all of their sources so you can refute all the nonsense that their preachers have told them all their lives. Here it is. It's in your hands. You could look at that and just say, wow, what a coincidence. You could look at that and say, wow, maybe God is giving us an opportunity to do something amazing here. Either way you look at it, I don't know why you would not want to to sit there and at least try to deal with things peacefully, right? Because keep in mind, if you're set on an epic bloodbath, then you could always do your epic bloodbath later. At least try to deal with Islam as an ideology, because as Robert was pointing out, when Muslims leave Islam, which we see over and over again, they very often become very effective critics of Islam, and this sort of thing is snowballing. This sort of thing is snowballing, right? The more critics of Islam that you have, especially those who come from an Islamic background, the more people they influence to leave Islam. And so 10 becomes 100, and 100 becomes 1,000. And if you get enough critics of Islam around the world telling people the facts about Muhammad, even people who still remain Muslims, right? So you're going to have people who leave Islam. Then you're going to have people who remain Muslims, but even if they remain Muslims, they're gonna have their doubts now once they learn, the actual history of Muhammad and the actual history of the Quran, and they realize, wait a minute, the things my imam told me all my life, those things are completely contradicted by my sources, and so my leaders have been lying to me my entire life. Even if they decide, I'm still going to be a Muslim, they're going to have their doubts, and they're not exactly going to be the sort of people who are going out waging jihad for Allah. But even the people who remained absolutely devout, convinced Muslims, they're going to realize, hey, we are not in a position to take over the world right now, because you've got tons of people who've left. You've got tons of people who don't want to fight, and we're just not in a position to be going out waging jihad. In other words, those guys will tend to stand out more. The more radical Muslims, those will stand out more, and you can deal with those. So the idea that we're advocating capitulation by saying, hey, you can do this peacefully. You can respond to this ideology peacefully without going on a killing spree. My goodness, how long have we been standing against Islam to be called capitulators?
There's just so much craziness, David.
Yeah, it's a capitulator in you.
Yeah, that must be it. There's just so much idiocy in this world, I tell you. It just makes my head spin sometimes. I do sometimes think about the passage about God making them believe a strong delusion. And I think, man, we sure live in those times. People believe the craziest things. And one of them is, of course, that Islam is a religion of peace that has nothing to do with terrorism. And the real problems are those who call out Islamic terror. But, of course, there are many others. We could be here for hours going through all of them.
Mm-hmm. Here we go. Another question. We're gonna sign out here in a few. But someone said, so David, the option you've chosen is basically waiting for Islam to be completely exposed to Westerners. His solution was basically speeding up this process. Why do you think your solution is better? So talking about the, I think
he didn't. The shooter.
Yeah,
the shooter didn't speed up the process of people awakening to Islam. The shooter has made it more difficult, and I'm sure it's going to get a lot more difficult in the coming days, to speak in the public square about the jihad threat and about the oppression that Sharia codifies. These things are going to be stigmatized, already are being stigmatized, as being something that incites to violence, and consequently have to be forcibly shut down. And there will be forcible shutting down of those who speak about these issues. And so the idea that people know more about the jihad threat because of this guy, it's just the opposite. People will be less inclined to hear about the jihad threat because of this guy.
Yeah, so if this guy is successful and he actually shuts down speech and more people turn to violence, he could speed up the process in terms of the bloodbath that he wants.
Yes.
Yeah, he could speed up that process, but I think a peaceful solution that actually works would be better than that. By the way, I'm kind of disturbed about how many people over here think that's just a silly idea, the idea that you can respond in any other way than violence. So here's Jane saying, what does Robert think about the likelihood of that optimistic view? So Jane may be saying, what you actually think. But just to clarify, guys, what I'm saying is, those of you who are advocating violent bloodbath, right, as the only alternative, well, if a peaceful solution does not work, you'll still have your opportunity to go on your killing sprees, ladies and gentlemen. I'm saying, why would you not try, knowing that we are the first generation that even has an opportunity to deal with this peacefully? Why would you
Yes.
not at least want to try it? What do you think, Robert?
I think that it's absolutely true. It cannot be emphasized enough, David, what you're saying about how this is the first time this has ever happened. People don't realize that. They think that Islam has been in the world 1,400 years. That must mean that there are 1,400 years worth of David Woods in the world, and that there have always been critics of Islam throughout history. That is not the case. It's not very well known, but one of the rules of the Dhimma, of the subjugated, the rules for the subjugation of the non-Muslims, was that they were forbidden to read the Quran, and it was punishable by death if Dhimmi Christians or Jews in Muslim domains had a copy of the Quran. And that this was precisely in order to foreclose on criticism of it. And any criticism of it, of course, was and is punishable by death under Islamic law. And so the Islam went through, of course, in the days before printing presses also. This made it nigh impossible for non-Muslims to own a copy of the Quran, and very dangerous for them to do so. And so most people had no idea what the Quran said. Most non-Muslims had no idea what the Quran said. And the criticism was violently punished. So essentially, there wasn't any. Now, in the 20th century and the 21st century, you have the possibility, you have mass printing, mass communications. It's impossible for Muslims to keep the translations that they make of these books from the Quran and the Hadith from Arabic for Muslims. You know, of course, the Saudis translated Bukhari and Muslim and the other Hadith collections originally so that Muslims who don't speak Arabic, which is most Muslims in the world today, would be able to read them. And they can't keep them out of our hands. But this is the first time there has been large-scale and rational, reasoned critiques of Islam and real revelations on a large scale to non-Muslims of what the Quran and the Hadith actually do teach. This is the first time in the history of Islam that there has ever been such a thing. And so this is, I think, one of the reasons why the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the other Islamic organizations in the world are so intent on shutting us down. And it's a shame that the leftist socialists who are in power in the West are on board with this operation to shut down the freedom of speech, because this is the discourse that we have to have that will prevent more jihad violence and more people being killed and subjugated in the West. And there's never been in human history any other attempt to do this on any large scale. I know of a book by Humphrey Prideaux critiquing Muhammad in the 18th century, and there were some critiques. There was a critique, of course, by St. John of Damascus in the 8th century of the Quran and some of the teachings of Islam, and there have been a few here and there throughout history, but nothing like on the scale of what we see today. And nothing like with the reach that we have to Muslims that we see today, that Muslims themselves are able to read my books, watch your videos, and come to judgments about whether what we're saying is true and what they really, what kind of moral stance they want to have about the Quran's violent teachings and misogynist teachings and anti-Semitic teachings and all the rest of it. Never happened before.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that those of you who believe that violence is the only solution, right? I'm assuming you would agree that a couple of random people, like the Christchurch shooter, that's not going to solve your problem, right? I hope you don't think that a Breivik here or this guy there, I hope you don't think that that's going to solve your problem, because that would be ridiculous, right? What you're really thinking is the entire West rises up and goes on a killing spree. That's what you're assuming, right? Well, just think about that. In other words, to get what you want, you would have to have what? You would have to have pretty much the West in general on your side to make that work, to make your bloody violent revolution work, right? You can't do it with a couple of guys. If you think that your little, you and your pals are going to go out and do launch a violent revolution, you're stupid. You're going to get caught. You're going to get put in prison or killed, right? It's not going to do what you think it will do. So the only way you could even think about getting this to work would be that most people agree with you and your plans, and you get the government on your side and the military on your side and all these things, right? That's what it would require. So that's your end game, right? That's what you're aiming towards. Well, think about that from my perspective here. If you're going to get everyone on your side, and you're going to get the government and everyone else on your side, and they're all going to agree with you, why would you just not use that opportunity to refute Islam? Because I pointed out, if so many people are leaving Islam, when 98% of everything they hear about Islam is positive from every single source. What would happen? What would happen if it was just on regular television, the history of the Quran and the blunders in the Quran and all of the horrible things that Muhammad did, the things that get hidden from Muslims today? What would happen if all of that became common knowledge, because now everyone is on your side and they all agree with you? So in that situation where you now have all of the major platforms for sharing information, you have all those on your side, because those are the things you're going to need to wage your bloodbath. Why would you want to wage a bloodbath then? Unless you're just a white nationalist or white supremacist, you want to go out and killing everyone because of their skin color or something like that. But as far as if Islam is your concern, Islam can be refuted. It can be refuted. And if you ever get the power and authority to go kill more than 1 billion people somehow, it would be much easier to just refute the ideology. So those would be my views. All right, Robert, we have a couple minutes left. Any final thoughts here on this?
Well, I could say a little farewell, that if I do get all shut down from everything, it's been great, and the jihad will still be very much with you, but keeping people from speaking about it is not going to solve anything. It's only going to incite more violence. And so if you really don't want to see shootings like what we see in New Zealand, then you have to allow for open public discussion of the threat that comes from the Quran and from the teachings of Muhammad, the jihad threat that has for 1400 years been menacing non-Muslims. This guy was an evil, terrible person who killed innocent people. There is no justification for that in any way, shape, or form. There is no good that can be said of it, but the responsibility for it does not lie with people who critique Islam. The responsibility for it lies with those who shut down rational critique of Islam and opposition to jihad.
All right, and I'll just say in closing here, guys, there's a reason that you have historically had violent attacks about books being published about Muhammad, like the Satanic Verses, or cartoons being published about Muhammad. Robert here was one of the targets in a terrorist attack in Texas, where jihadis were coming to kill him and Pamela Geller and others for criticizing Muhammad. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is many Muslims themselves realize Islam cannot withstand criticism. And so if you know that even the Muslim leaders themselves understand that Islam cannot withstand criticism, why would you think, hey, let me just turn straight to violence and not focus on this criticism that even the Muslim leaders themselves are extremely worried about, extremely concerned about? So think about that. And as far as the time that we're in right now, this is a really rough time. This is a rough time to be in, because there's a lot of people that died. They were, even though we disagree with their prophet and so on, these are people who were in a mosque and got gunned down by a guy who's just trying to increase the division. So if that's what he wants, he wants to start an uproar. He wants everyone attacking each other in the aftermath of this attack. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for that. If you have an opportunity right now to, talk to a Muslim and be friends with a Muslim, do that, or anyone else, leftist, whatever position you're on. If you can, get along and talk about this with someone. But what you don't want to do is let someone use this for their own agenda, right? Don't let someone use this attack to say, this is why we need to stop all of this, or this is why we need to shut this person down. Be very wary of people who are using attacks like this to for their own agendas, right? So yeah, just, let's all try and get along. In fact, I was going to post some very very savage criticisms of Muhammad this weekend. I'm even going to put them off for a couple of days. I'll put them off till next week, just so people can focus on trying to understand these issues and get to the bottom of things uh, without shutting down speech. So thanks to Robert for joining me for this and having his input. And I'll be live again in half an hour with the apostate prophet to discuss this further. God bless everyone.